The courtroom was quiet, but the tension in the air felt heavy enough to cut with a knife. People sat on wooden benches, whispering among themselves, their voices low but filled with emotion. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others clenched, their fists tightly, anger simmering just beneath the surface. The case everyone had gathered for wasn't an ordinary one. It was personal, raw, and deeply controversial. Officer Ryan Mitchell stood near the front of the room, his uniform pressed and polished as always. He looked calm from a distance, but if you looked closer, you'd notice the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His hands twitched slightly at his sides, betraying the nervous energy coursing through him. Today wasn't just any day for Ryan. It was the day he would face consequences for something he never thought would come back to haunt him. A traffic stop gone horribly wrong. Across the aisle, Andrea Lewis sat quietly beside her lawyer. She wore a simple blouse and skirt, her posture straight and dignified despite everything she had endured. Her dark eyes scanned the room briefly before settling on Ryan. There was no hatred in her gaze, only a quiet determination that seemed to radiate outward. For months, Andrea had waited for this moment, hoping not just for justice but for acknowledgement that what happened to her shouldn't have happened to anyone. It all began late one evening when Andrea was driving home after a long shift at work. She had been tired but content, thinking about dinner and maybe catching up on her favorite TV show. That's when the flashing lights appeared behind her car. At first, Andrea didn't understand why she was being pulled over. She hadn't sped, hadn't run a red light, hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. But as she pulled onto the shoulder and rolled down her window, dread started creeping into her chest. Ryan approached her vehicle with his usual swagger, his flashlight shining directly into her face. "License and registration," he said curtly, his tone leaving little room for questions. Andrea complied without hesitation, handing over the requested documents. As Ryan examined them, his expression hardened. "Step out of the car," he ordered abruptly. Confused and alarmed, Andrea did as she was told. She stepped onto the pavement, her heart pounding faster with each passing second. Ryan's demeanor grew increasingly aggressive as he questioned her about where she was coming from and whether she had anything illegal in the car. When Andrea insisted she had nothing to hide, Ryan's patience snapped. Without warning, he grabbed her arms roughly and pushed her against the hood of the car. Then came the unthinkable. He took out a pocket knife and sliced open the back of her shirt, claiming he needed to check for hidden contraband. Andrea froze, humiliation washing over her like a wave. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she stood there silently, every fiber of her being screaming that this wasn't right. Passers-by slowed down to watch the scene unfold, some shaking their heads in disapproval while others drove on indifferently. By the time Ryan finished his search and declared she was free to go, Andrea felt stripped of more than just her clothing. She felt stripped of her dignity. Word of the incident spread quickly. Friends and family rallied around Andrea, urging her to file a complaint. At first, she hesitated. After all, going up against a police officer wasn't easy, especially when the system often seemed stacked against people like her. But deep down, Andrea knew she couldn't stay silent. If she didn't speak up, who would? So, with trembling hands, she filed a formal complaint against Ryan, sparking an investigation that would eventually lead them both to this very courtroom. As the clock ticked closer to 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the room to order. Everyone rose to their feet as Judge Lisa Monroe entered, her black robe flowing behind her like a shadow. She carried herself with authority, her presence commanding respect, even before she spoke a single word. Ryan glanced toward the bench, expecting to see yet another faceless figure whose name he wouldn't remember once the trial ended. But when his eyes met hers, his stomach dropped. It was Andrea. No, not exactly Andrea, but close enough. The resemblance was uncanny. Same sharp cheekbones, same piercing gaze, same quiet strength. For a moment, Ryan forgot how to breathe. How could this be happening? Was fate playing some cruel joke on him? He wanted to protest, to demand answers, but the words caught in his throat as Andrea, or rather Judge Monroe, took her seat and began addressing the court. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady and clear. "We are here today to examine the actions of Officer Ryan Mitchell during a routine traffic stop involving Ms. Andrea Lewis. This case has drawn significant attention due to allegations of misconduct and racial profiling. My role is to ensure that justice is served fairly and impartially." Ryan's mind raced. He tried to focus on the judge's words, but all he could think about was the irony of the situation. Here he was, standing trial for cutting Andrea's shirt, and now she, or someone who looked eerily similar, was presiding over his fate. The universe couldn't get much crueler than this. While Ryan wrestled with his thoughts, Andrea watched, him carefully from her seat. She hadn't expected to feel sympathy for him, but seeing the fear in his eyes stirred something unexpected within her. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. She knew what it meant to carry shame, to wish you could turn back time and undo your mistakes, but she also knew that accountability was necessary for growth. And so, as the trial commenced, she resolved to remain steadfast, letting the evidence speak for itself. The prosecution presented its case first, laying out the timeline of events and showcasing video footage from Ryan's body camera. The grainy images showed Ryan's escalating behavior, from his initial questioning to the moment he pulled out his knife. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the jury saw the look of shock and humiliation on Andrea's face. Even Ryan flinched at the sight, unable to deny what the footage clearly depicted. When it was the defense's turn, Ryan's lawyer argued that his client had acted out of concern for public safety. Officer Mitchell believed Ms. Lewis might be concealing dangerous items, he explained. His actions, though perhaps extreme, were motivated by a desire to protect himself and others. But Andrea's lawyer countered sharply, pointing out inconsistencies in Ryan's account. If Officer Mitchell truly feared for his life, why did he fail to follow standard protocol? She asked. Why did he resort to such drastic measures without probable cause? As the arguments unfolded, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew increasingly tense. Supporters of both sides whispered heatedly among themselves, their opinions divided. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, eager to capture every detail for their articles. Meanwhile, Andrea remained composed, her expression unreadable even as memories of that fateful night threatened to overwhelm her. By the end of the day, exhaustion settled over everyone like a thick fog. Ryan left the courthouse feeling defeated, his confidence shaken. Andrea, on the other hand, walked away with a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, she knew she had already won in one important way. She had refused to let fear or shame dictate her life. Justice might still be uncertain, but hope burned brightly within her, and that was enough for now. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the courthouse, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. The second day of the trial began with a somber energy that hung heavy in the air. People filed into the courtroom slowly, their faces etched with anticipation. Some clutched newspapers or cups of coffee, while others whispered nervously to one another about what might unfold. For Andrea Lewis, this was more than just another court appearance. It was a chance to reclaim her voice and stand up for countless others who had been silenced by similar injustices. Judge Lisa Monroe entered the room with the same quiet authority she had displayed the day before. Her presence seemed to command respect even before she took her seat at the bench. As she adjusted her robe and glanced around the room, her eyes briefly met Andrea's. Though they weren't related, there was something about Lisa's demeanor that reminded Andrea of herself. Strong, composed, and unshakable. It gave her a small measure of comfort as the proceedings resumed. Ryan Mitchell sat stiffly beside his lawyer, his hands clasped tightly together on the table in front of him. His usual confidence was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he looked like a man bracing for impact. Every time Andrea glanced in his direction, she noticed how much older he appeared compared to the last time she'd seen him during the traffic stop. Stress lines creased his forehead and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Whether it was guilt or fear or perhaps both was impossible to tell, but Andrea couldn't help feeling a pang of pity for him. She quickly pushed the thought aside, reminding herself why she was here. The prosecution called its first witness, Marcus Johnson, a passerby who had witnessed part of the incident. Marcus was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a kind smile. He walked to the stand cautiously, his hands gripping the railing as if to steady himself. After swearing an oath to tell the truth, he recounted what he had seen that night. "I was driving home from work when I noticed the flashing lights," Marcus explained, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "At first I thought it was just a routine traffic stop, but then I saw Officer Mitchell pull Ms. Lewis out of her car and push her against the hood. That's when things got intense." He paused, glancing toward Andrea as if seeking permission to continue. When she nodded slightly, he went on. "I watched as he took out a knife and cut open the back of her shirt. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It didn't look like standard procedure to me. It looked wrong." The courtroom fell silent as Marcus spoke, his words painting a vivid picture of the humiliation Andrea had endured. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His lawyer scribbled notes furiously, preparing cross-examination questions, but even he seemed uneasy. When it was the defense's turn to question Marcus, they tried to poke holes in his testimony. "You said you only saw part of the incident, correct?" the lawyer asked, his tone sharp. "How can you be sure you understood the context of Officer Mitchell's actions?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before responding. "I may not have seen everything, but I know what I saw. And what I saw was unnecessary force being used against someone who clearly wasn't resisting." The exchange left a lasting impression on the jury, whose members exchanged glances as Marcus stepped down from the stand. Andrea felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Maybe, just maybe, people were starting to see the truth. Next, the prosecution introduced video footage from Ryan's body camera. The grainy images played on a large screen mounted at the front of the room, capturing every detail of the encounter between Ryan and Andrea. Gasps rippled through the audience as they watched Ryan escalate the situation, his movements growing, increasingly aggressive. When the moment came where he pulled out his knife and sliced Andrea's shirt, several people audibly winced. Andrea kept her gaze fixed on the screen, forcing herself to relive the nightmare. It wasn't easy. Her chest tightened with each passing second, but she refused to look away. This was her story, her truth, and she owed it to herself to face it head-on. Beside her, her lawyer placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. As the video ended, Judge Monroe addressed the courtroom. "This evidence will be considered carefully as we move forward," she said, her voice firm but compassionate. "Both sides will have ample opportunity to present their arguments." Ryan's lawyer attempted to downplay the significance of the footage, arguing that it didn't provide the full context of the situation. "Officer Mitchell acted based on his training and instincts," he insisted. "While his methods may have been unconventional, they were motivated by a genuine concern for safety." But Andrea's lawyer countered swiftly, pointing out inconsistencies in Ryan's behavior. If Officer Mitchell truly believed Ms. Lewis posed a threat, why did he fail to follow proper protocol? Why did he resort to such extreme measures without clear justification? The back and forth continued for hours, each side presenting its case with increasing intensity. Outside the courthouse, news of the trial spread rapidly. Protesters gathered on the steps, holding signs that read, "Justice for Andrea" and "End police brutality." Their chants echoed through the streets, drawing attention from passers-by and media outlets alike. Reporters swarmed the area, eager to capture sound bites and interviews with those involved. Inside, Andrea found herself overwhelmed by the weight of everything happening around her. She had always known the trial would attract attention, but she hadn't anticipated the sheer scale of public interest. Supporters approached her during breaks, thanking her for speaking out and expressing solidarity. Strangers hugged her, tears streaming down their faces as they shared their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. For Ryan, the day grew increasingly unbearable. Witness after witness testified against him, recounting details of the incident that painted him in an unfavorable light. Even fellow officers called to testify struggled to defend his actions, admitting under oath that cutting someone's clothing without probable cause violated department policies. By the time the afternoon recess rolled around, Ryan felt like he was drowning. During the break, Ryan's lawyer pulled him aside for a private conversation. "We need to prepare for the worst," the lawyer said bluntly. "The evidence is stacked against us, and the judge doesn't seem inclined to show leniency." Ryan nodded numbly, his mind racing. He wanted to argue, to insist that he had done nothing wrong, but deep down he knew the truth. He had let his anger and biases cloud his judgment, and now he was paying the price. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that he might actually lose. Back in the courtroom, the trial resumed with closing arguments. Andrea's lawyer delivered a passionate speech, urging the jury to recognize the broader implications of the case. "This isn't just about one officer or one victim," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's about holding our institutions accountable and ensuring that everyone, regardless of race or background, is treated with dignity and respect." Ryan's lawyer followed with a more subdued argument, appealing to the jury's sense of fairness. "Officer, Mitchell made a mistake, yes, but does that justify ruining his career? Does it justify labeling him as a monster?" As the arguments concluded, Judge Monroe instructed the jury to begin deliberations. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving Andrea alone with her thoughts. She sat quietly in her chair, staring at the empty space where Ryan had stood moments earlier. Despite everything, she couldn't shake the image of him sitting there, defeated and broken. Her lawyer joined her shortly afterward, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You've done everything you can," he said gently. "Now it's up to them." Andrea nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she had already achieved something important. By standing up and telling her story, she had sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored, a conversation about justice, accountability, and change. Whatever the verdict, she vowed to keep fighting, not just for herself but for everyone who deserved better. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the city, Andrea stepped outside the courthouse. The crowd of supporters greeted her with cheers and applause, their voices lifting her spirits. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. Justice might still be uncertain, but progress was within reach, and that was enough for now. The third day of the trial began under a gray sky, rain tapping lightly against the courthouse windows. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but quieter than before. People filed into the courtroom with a sense of anticipation, knowing that this might be the day when the jury reached its verdict. Andrea Lewis sat in her usual spot, her hands folded neatly in her lap, though her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't quite silence. She glanced at Ryan Mitchell occasionally, noticing how his shoulders slumped and his eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. The weight of the trial seemed to press down on everyone, but no one more so than him. Judge Lisa Monroe entered the room, her presence commanding immediate attention. As she took her seat, the murmurs in the courtroom faded into silence. Her expression was calm but serious, reflecting the gravity of what was happening. She addressed the court briefly, reminding everyone of the importance of patience and fairness during these final stages. Then, without further delay, she instructed the bailiff to bring in the jury. The 12 jurors filed in slowly, their faces unreadable. They had spent hours deliberating behind closed doors, weighing the evidence and debating the merits of both sides' arguments. Now, they carried themselves with a sense of purpose, aware that their decision would have far-reaching consequences. One by one, they took their seats, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Andrea felt her heart quicken as she watched them settle in. She knew this moment would define not only her life but also the lives of countless others who looked to her for hope. When all was ready, the foreperson stood and handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who then passed it to Judge Monroe. The judge scanned the paper carefully before looking up at the crowded courtroom. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, standing tall despite the tension in the air. "And what is your verdict?" Judge Monroe continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. The foreperson cleared her throat and read aloud. We find Officer Ryan Mitchell guilty on all counts. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Some people clapped softly, while others simply stared in stunned silence. For Andrea, the verdict felt like a release, a weight lifting off her chest after months of carrying it alone. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to remain composed. Beside her, her lawyer placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, offering a small smile of triumph. Across the aisle, Ryan's reaction was starkly different. His face turned pale and he slumped forward, burying his head in his hands. His lawyer whispered something into his ear, but Ryan didn't respond. He just sat there, frozen, as if unable to process what had happened. Judge Monroe proceeded to address the court, her tone measured yet firm. This case has highlighted the need for accountability within our institutions, she said, her words echoing through the quiet room. It is not enough to wear a badge or hold authority. We must also act with integrity and respect toward every individual, regardless of race or background. Today's verdict serves as a reminder of that responsibility. Her remarks were met with nods of agreement from many in the audience, though some remained skeptical, whispering quietly among themselves. Outside the courthouse, the news spread quickly. Protesters cheered, raising their signs higher and chanting louder. Reporters scrambled to capture reactions, thrusting microphones toward anyone willing to speak. Andrea emerged from the building, cautiously shielding her face from the cameras. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the sudden attention overwhelmed her. Still, she managed a brief statement. I hope this brings us closer to a world where justice is blind to color and bias. As the crowd dispersed and the media packed up their equipment, Andrea retreated to a nearby cafe to gather her thoughts. Sitting alone at a corner table, she reflected on everything that had led her to this point. She thought about the night, of the traffic stop, the fear, the humiliation, the anger, and how those feelings had driven her to seek justice. It hadn't been easy. There were moments when she doubted herself, when the pressure became almost unbearable. But now, sitting here with the knowledge that her fight had paid off, she felt a deep sense of pride, not just in herself, but in the community that had rallied behind her. Meanwhile, Ryan struggled to come to terms with the verdict. Back at his apartment, he paced back and forth, replaying the events of the trial in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Andrea standing confidently beside her lawyer, her dignity intact despite everything he had done to her. Nor could he forget the expressions on the jurors' faces as they delivered their decision, faces filled with disappointment and resolve. For the first time in years, Ryan allowed himself to confront the truth. He had made a terrible mistake, one born out of arrogance and prejudice, and now he would pay the price. That evening, Ryan poured himself a drink and sat down at his kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. Memories flooded back. Memories of his early days as a police officer, when he genuinely believed he was making a difference. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that ideal. Power had corrupted him, turning him into someone who acted out of fear rather than compassion. He realized now that he had failed, not just Andrea, but the entire community he had sworn to protect. The realization hit him hard, leaving him feeling hollow and defeated. Despite his guilt, Ryan knew he couldn't undo the past. What he could do, however, was try to make amends. The idea came to him late that night as he lay awake staring at the ceiling. Maybe, just maybe, he could use his experience to help others avoid the mistakes he had made. It wouldn't erase what he had done, but it might give him a chance to redeem himself. The next morning, Ryan contacted a local community center known for its work with at-risk youth. He explained his situation hesitantly, unsure how they would react. To his surprise, the director agreed to meet with him. Over coffee, Ryan shared his story, admitting his faults and expressing his desire to contribute positively. The director listened carefully, nodding occasionally but remaining cautious. By the end of the conversation, however, she extended an invitation for Ryan to volunteer at the center, provided he approached the role with humility and sincerity. Ryan accepted, eagerly, seeing it as an opportunity to start anew. His first few weeks at the center were challenging. Many of the young people distrusted him, and some even confronted him directly about his actions. But Ryan didn't shy away from their questions. Instead, he answered honestly, acknowledging his mistakes and explaining how he planned to change. Slowly but surely he began earning their trust, or at least their willingness to listen. For Andrea, life returned to a semblance of normalcy after the trial. She resumed her work as a legal advocate, using her platform to push for reforms in law enforcement. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and collaborated with organizations dedicated to ending racial profiling and police brutality. Her efforts earned widespread recognition, inspiring others to join the fight for justice. Yet, despite her growing influence, Andrea remained grounded, always remembering why she had started this journey in the first place. One afternoon, as Andrea walked through the park near her home, she noticed a familiar figure sitting on a bench. It was Ryan. At first, she considered walking past without acknowledging him, but something stopped her. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe a lingering sense of empathy. Whatever it was, she approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. "Hello, Andrea," Ryan said, standing up awkwardly. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to me." Andrea studied him for a moment, noting the sincerity in his eyes. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone neutral. "I wanted to apologize," Ryan replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Not because I think it'll fix anything, but because I owe it to you. What I did was wrong, and I'm sorry." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with regret. Andrea took a deep breath, considering her response. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you for saying that," she said simply. "Apologies are important, but actions matter more. If you're truly committed to changing, prove it." Ryan nodded, earnestly. "I will. I've already started volunteering at a community center. It's small, but it's a step." Andrea offered a faint smile. "Good. Keep going." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ryan standing there reflecting on her parting words. Though their encounter was brief, it left a lasting impression on both of them. For Andrea, it reinforced her belief in the power of forgiveness and redemption. For Ryan, it served as a reminder that the path to change was long and difficult, but worth taking. As days turned into weeks, Andrea continued her advocacy work with renewed vigor. She launched initiatives aimed at educating officers on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques, partnering with law enforcement agencies willing to embrace reform. Her programs gained traction, sparking conversations about accountability and equity across the country. Meanwhile, Ryan threw himself into his volunteer work, gradually rebuilding his reputation and earning the respect of those around him. Though their paths rarely crossed again, Andrea and Ryan remained connected by the shared experience that had changed their lives forever. For Andrea, it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of justice prevailing. The weeks following the trial were a whirlwind of activity for Andrea Lewis. Her life, once quiet and predictable, had transformed into something she barely recognized. Every day brought new challenges, new opportunities, and new voices clamoring for her attention. Reporters called constantly asking for interviews. Activists invited her to speak at rallies and conferences. Even strangers stopped her on the street, thanking her for standing up and sharing her story. At first, Andrea found it overwhelming, but she soon realized that her voice mattered now more than ever. She couldn't turn away from the responsibility she had inadvertently taken on. One evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, Andrea sat alone in her apartment, staring out the window at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like stars, but instead of feeling peaceful, she felt restless. Despite the verdict and the support she had received, Andrea knew the fight was far from over. A guilty verdict wasn't enough to fix the deep-rooted issues within the system. It was just one step, a small victory in a much larger battle. She sighed, rubbing her temples as she thought about what came next. Her thoughts drifted back to Ryan Mitchell. She hadn't seen him since their brief encounter in the park, but his words still lingered in her mind. If you're truly committed to changing, prove it. Those words stuck with her because they mirrored her own beliefs about accountability. Justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about creating opportunities for growth and transformation. Andrea wondered if Ryan was truly trying to change or if he was simply going through the motions. Either way, she hoped he would succeed, not for his sake, but for the sake of everyone who might benefit from his efforts. The next morning, Andrea arrived early at the community center where she volunteered. She had partnered with the organization months ago to develop programs aimed at educating law enforcement officers on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. Today marked the launch of the first workshop, and Andrea was both excited and nervous. Would the officers take it seriously? Would they resist the lessons being taught? These questions weighed heavily on her mind as she set up the room, arranging chairs in a circle to encourage open dialogue. By the time the participants arrived, Andrea's nerves had settled slightly. The group consisted of about 15 officers, ranging from rookies fresh out of the academy to seasoned veterans nearing retirement. Some looked skeptical, while others appeared genuinely curious. Ryan wasn't among them. He was still serving his sentence, but Andrea often thought about how different things might have been if he had been there. The session began with introductions. Each officer shared their name, rank, and reason for attending. Many admitted they had been required to come by their superiors, while a few expressed genuine interest in learning more. When it was Andrea's turn to speak, she stood slowly, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "I know some of you may not want to be here, and that's okay. But I hope you'll keep an open mind because this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. We're here to talk about trust, respect, and understanding. Because without those things, we can't build a safer, fairer community." As she spoke, Andrea noticed subtle shifts in the room. Skeptical expressions softened, and some officers nodded along with her words. Encouraged, she moved on to the heart of the workshop. Real-life scenarios designed to highlight moments of bias and misunderstanding. Participants broke into small groups to discuss how they would handle each situation, then reconvened to share their insights. The discussions grew lively, with officers debating strategies and sharing personal experiences. One particularly heated exchange stood out to Andrea. An older officer argued that strict enforcement was necessary to maintain order, while a younger colleague countered that empathy and communication could achieve better results. Andrea listened intently, allowing the conversation to unfold naturally before stepping in to guide it toward constructive solutions. By the end of the session, even the most resistant participants seemed to leave with a renewed perspective. Meanwhile, Ryan adjusted to life after prison. His sentence had been relatively short due to mitigating factors, including his willingness to cooperate during the trial and his subsequent volunteer work. Still, re-entering society proved challenging. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone labeled a criminal. Neighbors whispered behind his back, casting judgmental glances whenever he passed by. Ryan understood their reactions. After all, he had spent years doing the same to others, but that didn't make it any easier. Determined to rebuild his life, Ryan threw himself into his volunteer work at the youth center. He mentored teenagers, teaching them about conflict resolution and leadership skills. He organized workshops on civic engagement, encouraging young people to use their voices to advocate for change. Though many doubted his sincerity at first, Ryan earned their trust through consistent effort and genuine care. Over time, he became a familiar and respected figure in the community, a far cry from the man who had once wielded power recklessly. Despite his progress, Ryan struggled with guilt. Nights were the hardest. Alone in his small apartment, memories of his past actions haunted him. He replayed the traffic stop over and over in his mind, cringing at the choices he had made. Sometimes, he wondered if he deserved a second chance. Other times, he reminded himself that redemption wasn't about deserving. It was about striving to do better. One weekend, Ryan attended a community event hosted by the same organization Andrea worked with. He hadn't planned to go, but the director of the youth center encouraged him, saying it would be good exposure for the kids. As Ryan walked through the crowded hall, shaking hands and chatting with attendees, he spotted Andrea across the room. She stood near a table displaying informational pamphlets, engaged in conversation with another volunteer. For a moment, Ryan hesitated, unsure whether approaching her would be welcome. Then, gathering his courage, he made his way over. "Andrea," he said softly, catching her attention. "Hi." She turned to face him, surprise flickering across her features. "Ryan," she replied, her tone neutral. "What are you doing here?" "I'm volunteering," he explained, gesturing toward a group of teenagers nearby. "I help out at the youth center. Thought I'd stop by and see what this event was all about." Andrea studied him for a moment, searching his face for signs of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded. "That's good. I'm glad you're using your experience to help others." Ryan exhaled, relieved by her response. "Thanks," he said. "It means a lot coming from you." They talked for a while longer, discussing their respective work and the challenges they faced. Andrea shared stories of resistance from officers unwilling to embrace reform, while Ryan spoke about the stigma he encountered daily. Despite their differences, they found common ground in their shared goal of fostering understanding and accountability. As the evening drew to a close, Andrea extended an invitation. "We're hosting another workshop next month," she said. "If you're interested, maybe you could attend. It might give you some tools to use in your mentoring work." Ryan hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that," he said. "Thank you." Their interaction was brief, but it left both of them reflecting on the possibilities of reconciliation and collaboration. For Andrea, it reinforced her belief that everyone deserved a chance to grow and contribute positively. For Ryan, it offered a glimmer of hope, a reminder that bridges could be built, even between people with vastly different histories. In the weeks that followed, Andrea continued expanding her programs, partnering with schools, churches, and nonprofits to reach wider audiences. Her advocacy gained national attention, earning her invitations to speak at prestigious events and collaborate with influential figures. Yet no matter how high her profile rose, Andrea remained grounded, always remembering why she had started this journey in the first place. Ryan, too, kept pushing forward. He attended Andrea's workshop, soaking up every lesson and applying it to his work with the youth center. Slowly but surely, he began rebuilding his reputation, earning the trust of those around him. Though scars from his past remained, he carried them as reminders of the importance of humility and compassion. Together, in their own ways, Andrea and Ryan contributed to a broader movement, one that sought to heal divisions and create a fairer, more compassionate society. Their paths rarely crossed again, but their stories intertwined, serving as testaments to the power of resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring pursuit of justice. And as the city moved forward, the echoes of their efforts lingered, inspiring others to join the fight for change. Months turned into years, and the city continued to evolve. The trial of Ryan Mitchell had become a turning point, a moment that forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and accountability. For Andrea Lewis, life had taken on a rhythm of purpose and determination. She no longer worked in obscurity. Her name was now synonymous with justice and reform. Her programs expanded beyond Chicago, reaching cities across the country. Law enforcement agencies began adopting her training modules, and community leaders invited her to speak at events aimed at fostering dialogue between police officers and civilians. Despite her growing influence, Andrea remained humble. She knew the work was far from finished. Systemic change didn't happen overnight, and there were still pockets of resistance. Officers who refused to acknowledge their biases, communities that distrusted authority figures and politicians, who prioritized optics over action. But Andrea refused to let setbacks discourage her. Every small victory mattered, whether it was convincing one officer to approach situations differently or helping a teenager understand their rights. Progress came in waves, not straight lines. One crisp autumn morning, Andrea stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people gathered for a national conference on criminal justice reform. The room buzzed with energy as attendees exchanged ideas and shared stories of success and failure. Andrea adjusted the microphone, taking a deep breath before she began to speak. "When I started this journey," she said, her voice steady but warm, "I never imagined I'd be standing here today. I didn't set out to become an advocate or a leader. All I wanted was to tell my story, to say that what happened to me was wrong and shouldn't happen to anyone else. But along the way, I realized something important. Our stories have power. They can spark conversations, inspire action, and remind us that we're not alone." She paused, scanning the crowd. Faces young and old, black and white, civilian and law enforcement, looked back at her with rapt attention. Andrea felt a surge of gratitude, not just for their presence but for the collective effort they represented. Change wasn't the work of one person. It was the result of many coming together. "And so," she continued, "I want to thank all of you for being here, for listening, for learning, and for committing yourselves to making things better. We won't always agree, and we won't always get it right. But as long as we keep showing up, as long as we stay committed to understanding each other, we'll move closer to the world we all deserve." Her words earned a standing ovation, applause rippling through the room like thunder. As Andrea stepped off the stage, several attendees approached her to express their admiration and share their own experiences. One woman, a police captain from Detroit, thanked Andrea for her courage and promised to implement her training program in her department. Another man, a college student, told her how her story had inspired him to pursue a career in social justice advocacy. Each interaction reminded Andrea why she kept going, even when the road felt impossibly long. Meanwhile, Ryan Mitchell's transformation continued quietly, away from the spotlight. He had embraced his role at the youth center fully, dedicating himself to mentoring teenagers and teaching them valuable life skills. His reputation within the community grew, though it came with its share of challenges. Some parents remained wary of allowing him near their children, while others praised his efforts, seeing him as proof that people could change. Ryan accepted both reactions gracefully, knowing he had to earn trust every single day. One afternoon, as Ryan helped a group of teens prepare for a debate competition, he received a surprising phone call. It was Andrea. At first, he thought it might be a mistake. Why would someone as influential as her reach out to him? But when he answered, her voice was friendly and familiar. "Hi, Ryan," she said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "No, not at all," Ryan replied, stepping outside to avoid disturbing the kids. "What's up?" "I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to speak at an event next month," Andrea explained. "It's a panel discussion about second chances and accountability. I think your perspective could really add value." Ryan hesitated, caught off guard by the request. "Are you sure?" he asked cautiously. "I mean, do you think people will listen to me?" "I do," Andrea said firmly. "You've done the work, Ryan. You've shown that change is possible. That's worth sharing." After a moment of thought, Ryan agreed. He spent the next few weeks preparing carefully, rehearsing what he would say and anticipating potential questions. On the day of the event, he arrived early, nerves fluttering in his chest. The room was filled with activists, educators, and community members eager to hear diverse perspectives on the topic of redemption. When it was Ryan's turn to speak, he took a deep breath and began. "A few years ago, I made a terrible mistake," he admitted, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "I abused my authority and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. There's no excuse for what I did, and I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life. But losing everything taught me something important. That accountability isn't just about punishment, it's about growth. It's about proving through your actions that you're committed to doing better." The audience listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others leaning forward to catch every word. When Ryan finished, the room erupted in applause. Several people approached him afterward, thanking him for his honesty and expressing admiration for his journey. For the first time in years, Ryan felt a sense of belonging, not because he sought forgiveness, but because he had earned respect. As the months passed, Andrea and Ryan crossed paths occasionally, collaborating on projects or attending the same events. Their relationship remained professional but respectful, built on mutual acknowledgement of their shared mission. While their past would always connect them, they focused on the future, the possibilities of creating a system rooted in fairness and compassion. In the broader landscape, signs of progress emerged. Police departments implemented new policies designed to reduce bias and improve community relations. Activists celebrated victories, such as the passage of legislation addressing racial profiling and excessive force. Yet challenges persisted. Tensions flared during high-profile cases. Protests erupted in response to incidents of injustice, and debates raged about the best path forward. Through it all, Andrea and Ryan served as reminders that change required patience, persistence, and partnership. One evening, as Andrea walked home from a long day of meetings, she stopped at a park bench overlooking the city skyline. The lights shimmered against the darkening sky, casting a soft glow over the bustling streets below. She sat down, letting the cool breeze wash over her. For a moment, she allowed herself to reflect, not just on how far she had come, but on how much farther there was to go. Her thoughts drifted to Ryan. Despite everything, she couldn't deny the impact he had made. He wasn't perfect, and neither was the system they were trying to fix, but perfection wasn't the goal. Growth was. Understanding was. Justice, messy and imperfect as it often was. Andrea smiled faintly, feeling a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead would still be difficult, full of obstacles and uncertainties. But she believed deeply and fiercely that progress was possible. And as long as people like her, and even people like Ryan, kept showing up, the journey would be worth it.